The rain hammered the pavement outside the small upscale bar in Virginia Beach, turning the neon signs from the storefronts into blurry watercolors on the windshield of the idling taxi. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged whiskey, polished wood, and the quiet, satisfied exhaustion of people who had just achieved something monumental. It was a celebration, the kind that only a handful of people in the world ever get to experience. At a corner table, surrounded by a small group of friends and family, sat Sarah Jenkins. To the casual observer, she was just another guest, a woman in her late 20s with a kind smile and intelligent eyes that crinkled at the corners when she laughed. But her presence was the very reason for the gathering. A few hours earlier, under the harsh fluorescent lights of a naval base parade ground, Sarah had officially become a United States Navy SEAL, one of the first women to ever complete the grueling, mind-bending program. The silver trident pin, still feeling foreign and heavy, was fastened to the collar of her civilian blouse, a quiet, gleaming testament to a journey that had nearly broken her 1,000 times over. Her brother Mark, a cheerful accountant with no military experience whatsoever, was holding court at the bar, telling a slightly embellished version of Sarah's Hell Week ordeal to a captivated audience of her teammates. Nearby, her parents, Bill and Carol, they watched their daughter with a mixture of pride and the residual anxiety that came from years of worrying about letters from a combat zone. Across the table from Sarah sat her two closest friends from the teams, Marcus "Tank" Williams, a mountain of a man whose gentle demeanor belied his formidable reputation as a breacher, and David Chen, a wiry, sharp-witted intelligence guru who could talk his way out of any situation and fight his way out of the rest. They were her brothers, forged in the crucible of BUD/S and the unspoken bond of shared hardship. The evening was a perfect, much-needed release. For the first time in over a year, Sarah's mind wasn't consumed with tactics, timers, or the crushing weight of the boat. She was just a sister, a daughter, a friend. The conversation flowed easily, a mix of inside jokes, laughter, and the comfortable silences of people who didn't need to fill every void with words. It was well past 11 when a new energy entered the bar. A boisterous group of 4 men and 2 women piled in, shaking off the rain like excited dogs. They were loud, their laughter a little too sharp, their movements a little too wide. They were clearly celebrating something of their own, and they commandeered a large table near the bar, their voices instantly competing with the bar's ambient music. At the head of this new group was a man Sarah instantly recognized. She'd seen his face on billboards and in local news segments for the high-octane reality TV show about deep-sea treasure hunters. His name was Kyle Reynolds, and he carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man used to being the center of attention, his expensive leather jacket and perfectly styled hair marking him as someone from a different world than the one Sarah and her friends inhabited. His entourage consisted of a producer type with a permanent frown, 2 women in stylish dresses who looked bored, and 2 other men who seemed to be his sycophantic crew members. For a while, the 2 groups coexisted in a state of mutual indifference. But then Kyle, on his way back from the restroom, paused by Sarah's table. His eyes landed on the silver trident on her collar. "Hey," he said, his voice loud and a little slurry. "Cool pin. Is that like a scuba diving thing for the treasure hunting?" He gestured vaguely at his own chest. The table fell silent, and Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. David's eyes, however, lit up with a dangerous glint of amusement. Sarah, determined to keep the peace, offered a polite, closed-lipped smile. "Something like that," she said, her tone inviting him to move along. But Kyle didn't move along. He pulled out the empty chair next to Sarah and sat down, uninvited. "So, you a diver? We're always looking for good divers on the show. Get some camera time. What's your name?" "Sarah," she said simply, but her eyes flicking to her friends. Marcus was now staring directly at Kyle, a silent, immovable force. David was sipping his beer, his expression one of pure, delighted anticipation. "Sarah," Kyle repeated, leaning in a little too close. "So, Sarah the diver, what do you do when you're not pinning on cool little pins?" "I'm in the Navy," she said, her voice even. "Aha! A sailor!" he boomed, turning back to his table as if to share the joke. "I love it. My show is all about the ocean. Yeah, we're practically colleagues." He turned back to her. "So you swab decks? Load missiles? What's the gig?" It was a condescending question, dripping with the assumption that her job was a menial, supporting role to his glamorous, televised adventures. The air around the table grew cold. "I'm a special operator," Sarah stated, the simple truth hanging in the air. Kyle's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "Special operator? Like what? You steer the special boats?" Marcus let out a low, rumbling chuckle. David covered his mouth with his hand, feigning a cough. "Something like that," Sarah said, giving him one last chance to retreat with a shred of dignity. He didn't take it. Emboldened by the beer and his own inflated sense of self, he leaned forward again, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a conspiratorial whisper. "Okay, well look, here's the thing. My friends and I have this bet. A stupid bet." He waved a hand dismissively. "The dress code here is a little buttoned up." He gestured vaguely at the bar's clientele, which was a mix of military and civilians in casual but neat attire. "And we were just joking that this place would be more fun if people loosened up a bit." He looked directly at Sarah, his gaze sliding down to her blouse, then back to her face. "So, I'm supposed to come over here and ask you to remove that uniform." The words landed like stones in a still pond. The background noise of the bar seemed to recede, leaving only the stunned silence at their table. Kyle, oblivious, misread their shock for compliance. He gave a confident, lopsided grin. "It's just a joke. For the bet, you take off the blouse. Maybe my producer over there gets you a drink. We have a laugh. What do you say?" He reached out a hand, and as if to lightly tap the trident on her collar. He never made contact. Marcus's massive hand clamped down on Kyle's wrist with the speed of a striking snake, stopping him an inch from Sarah's chest. Kyle's eyes went wide with surprise and pain. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Marcus said, his voice a low granite rumble. Sarah gently placed her hand on Marcus's arm. "It's okay, Tank. Let him go." Marcus held the stare for a long, tense moment, then released Kyle's wrist. To Sarah, who was watching him with a calm, steady gaze that was far more unnerving than any show of anger. For a few seconds, he seemed to reconsider. Then, the need to reassert his dominance, to win the bet in front of his watching friends, overrode his survival instincts. He straightened his jacket, a cheap move to regain his composure. "Look, it was just a friendly request. No need for the big guy to get physical. I'm just trying to have a good time. So how about it? Blouse off, drinks on me." The sheer, unearned arrogance of the man was breathtaking. He stood there, a reality TV star who played at adventure, demanding that a Navy SEAL, a woman who had endured torture-level training and volunteered for the most dangerous missions on Earth, strip as a party trick for him and his friends. Sarah looked at him. She saw the expensive but tasteless watch, the affected stubble, the performative confidence. She saw a man who had spent his entire life being the big fish in whatever tiny pond he inhabited. And in that moment, sitting with her brothers in arms, who had bled with her, starved with her, and would die for her without a second's hesitation, she felt not anger, but a profound, overwhelming sense of the absurd. A smile touched her lips. It wasn't a polite smile or a nervous smile. It was the genuine, heartfelt smile of someone who has just been told the funniest joke they've ever heard. It started small and then grew. spreading across her face until her eyes were shining with it. She leaned back in her chair, the picture of relaxed amusement. Then she laughed. It wasn't a giggle or a chuckle. It was a full, clear, ringing laugh of pure, unadulterated joy at the sheer ridiculousness of the situation. It was the laugh of someone who had been cold, hungry, and terrified for days on end and had learned to find humor in the absurd. It was a laugh that carried the weight of 200-meter ocean swims, 40-mile marches with a 60-pound ruck, and the bone-deep knowledge of her own capability. Kyle's confident smirk faltered. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected. He'd expected awkwardness, maybe even anger. He hadn't expected to be laughed at. "What's so funny?" he demanded, his voice losing its smoothness. Sarah's laughter subsided into a wide, incredulous grin. She shook her head slowly, as if marveling at a beautiful sunset. "You," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "You are genuinely the funniest thing I've seen in months." "I'm serious," he pressed, his face reddening. "It's just a blouse. It's not a big deal." Sarah's grin didn't waver. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping so that only he and her friends could hear, though the rest of the bar seemed to be holding its breath. "Kyle, right? The treasure hunter?" She gestured towards her friends. "This is Marcus. He once carried a wounded teammate on his back for 3 miles through a swamp while taking small arms fire. And this is David. He can speak 4 languages fluently, and once talked his way out of being captured by a hostile militia by convincing them he was a Swedish journalist." She then tapped her own collar. "And this little pin you want me to take off for a cheap laugh? It's a Navy SEAL trident. To earn it, I spent a week in hell. I was cold, wet, sleep-deprived, and pushed past every limit I thought I had. I've jumped out of airplanes at night into the Black Ocean. I've dived in freezing pitch-black water. I've looked into the eyes of men who wanted to kill me and my countrymen." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle on him. Kyle was silent, his mouth slightly agape. His producer friend was now watching intently, sensing a shift in the room's power dynamic. Sarah's smile returned, eyes softer now, but with an edge that could cut glass. She delivered the final line, the one that would pop the bubble of his entire, fragile reality. "So here's the thing, Kyle. You just walked up to a table of United States Navy SEALs and, with a straight face, told one of us to undress. You literally just told a Navy SEAL to take off her uniform as a joke for your buddies." She let the statement hang in the air for a beat, 2 beats. "And I have to be honest with you," she continued, her tone conversational. "It's the most ridiculous, clueless, and unintentionally hilarious thing I have ever heard in my entire life. Do you even understand what you just did? It's like walking up to a Formula 1 driver and asking them to pop the hood so you can check their oil. It's like asking a brain surgeon to hand you their scalpel so you can open a letter." Kyle just stared, his face cycling through a spectrum of colors, red, then pale, then a splotchy combination of both. And the air of invincibility had completely evaporated, leaving behind a very ordinary, very embarrassed man who had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. Sarah stood up. She wasn't trying to intimidate him. She was simply rising to his level. She was a few inches shorter than him, but in that moment she seemed to tower over him. "You want me to take off my blouse, Kyle? Fine. I'll make you a deal." She turned her back to him. She unhooked the small silver bar from her collar. It looked so small, so insignificant, yet it looked so small, so insignificant. Yet it represented a world of sacrifice and achievement he couldn't begin to fathom. "This," she said, her voice clear and steady, "is my uniform. This tiny piece of metal is the single most important thing I own. It represents the men